Welcome to Locked in My Office. I'm Shane, and in this episode, I'm talking with my longtime friend, Mike. And Mike is a grad student at Tech, and we have quite a few things in common, but one of those things is Dungeons and Dragons. And it's an appropriate topic because lots of people at Michigan Tech are playing or have played or want to play Dungeons and Dragons. And so we kind of discuss what it is, or more generically, what a role-playing game is, a tabletop role-playing game. And we also get into what it can mean to you, right? And what it can do for you, and what values it can actually bring, and why it's important to so many people. And we talk about a couple other things like woodworking and things like that as well. So I hope you enjoy. And next week, I'm going to be talking with Sierra, one of my students, and she's bringing along some friends. So we'll see which friends come in. And this is actually going to be what I call the rando special, when I have kind of a hole in my schedule. And so I'm just going to pick some students, and we're just going to chit chat and see what happens. So hope to see you there as well next week. So I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, locked in my office. Oops, I'm on the wrong camera already. So I'm currently locked in my office with...
I'm Michael.
And we're here to talk about something that I think means a lot to both of us, and that's Dungeons and Dragons. Or, I don't know, maybe it's not the best thing to say Dungeons and Dragons anymore. There's a lot of I don't want to say, there's a lot of rephrasing about the idea of Dungeons and Dragons is the branded thing, or we were talking about this the other day.
Yeah.
So why would someone not want to say Dungeons and Dragons versus
Dungeons and Dragons, or D&D, is one very specific tabletop role-playing game, and there's a lot of other options out there, and D&D might be the most popular one at the moment, probably the most popular one overall in history, but there's a lot of other tabletop RPG games that can give you a slightly different experience, which might be something that people are looking for, especially if you're looking for something really mechanical. D&D might not be the choice for you. If you're looking for something that's very storytelling and very loose with the rules, D&D, again, might not be the choice. So D&D is just one game in a whole sea of games for the tabletop RPG genre.
So maybe for the sake of things, we should say tabletop games. But I think we should even go back further and just say what is it? Can you describe to people that might not know what D&D is, or what is a tabletop role-playing game?
So yeah, D&D is a tabletop role-playing game where you get a bunch of friends, players around a table, and you collectively tell a story within the set of rules, whether it's D&D or one of the other systems. And generally speaking, you use dice to kind of figure out, if you come up with a cool idea, my character wants to do this, you roll the dice and you see if your character is able to succeed, if they're not, and that helps the story slowly evolve over time.
Yeah, so the role-playing part, what does that role-playing part mean?
It's so one of the things with tabletop games is what each aspect of the game means is different for each group of players. For some people, the role-playing part means really getting into their created characters, giving them voices and a lot of personality, and really diving into the character and putting on a whole performance for the table. Whereas other people will just kind of look at their character sheet and go, okay, so my character would do X, Y, and Z, because that's what they would do, but they don't go into the whole acting of it. So the role-playing is on a large scale, but a lot of it, where you fall on that scale is going to depend on the group that you're playing with. So it's one of the challenges with the genre is everyone's expecting something slightly different when they go to play a tabletop RPG, and that's not always well communicated between the players, especially for first-time players.
Yeah, I think talking about first-time players people that are interested are oftentimes reluctant to get into the role-playing, to dive into it. There's some people that really will dive into it, but not everyone. Yeah, and I've always found that like, well, I guess we both volunteered for the Geek Up, right? And so that was an event where we were running D&D tables and just having people just come potentially play it for the first time. And in my advice, I always give to people that are reluctant to get into a character or a little confused or a little, I don't know, not able to get in the headspace, is I always tell them like, pick a character in fiction that they already know. Like if I'm making some sort of monk, I'm gonna pick Obi-Wan Kenobi, and say like my character's like Obi-Wan Kenobi, but maybe like a slight twist. But that way, you pick a character that you know, and that way, just starting out, you can always say like, well, what would Obi-Wan Kenobi do? Just to use that like.
Yeah, you have a much bigger reference to go off of when you're trying to make character decisions that way.
Yeah. Yeah, so you talked about like styles, like different play styles, and I kind of see there's a, once again, it's a spectrum, but there's really two styles in my opinion.
Okay.
Let's see if you can guess what I'm thinking. Like, what do you think the two styles are?
For tabletop RPGs or D&D
well, like
specifically?
I'm saying types of players, right? So types of players, more focused toward X or Y.
Okay, so I guess the big split I see in players are they're either more mechanically focused, so they really dive into how can I design and optimize my character to be the strongest in a battle or in a fight, which is where most of the mechanics for D&D end up being. Whereas there's other characters that say, I have a character idea or a story idea, and they're more interested in that and any sort of mechanics along the way. They are what they are, and they let things lie where they do. Those would be the two big split I see in players. And of course, there's a spectrum across that whole thing.
Yeah. Where do you identify in that spectrum?
I tend to lean a little bit more mechanical, but I very much do enjoy the very loose storytelling gameplay style.
Wait, so do you hate the game you play with me then?
No. So that's the thing. Most engineers, STEM majors that I've played D&D with tend to go mechanical, and I do very much enjoy that. And if you try to force someone into doing a very, I'm going to call it flexible or loose set of rules, kind of modifying them for the enhancement of the story, sometimes those people aren't super happy.
Yeah.
But if you go into a game knowing this game is going to have, more focus on the story than the mechanics, that's a decision you can make when you start playing the game, and you just accept it's a different type of game than what it could be. And this is one of those challenges for new players is they haven't played D&D, they don't know that there's different types of games within a role-playing game, even if it uses a single rule set, and they might end up in a game they weren't expecting, or they watched a YouTube video of someone playing and they think that's how everyone plays, but in reality, most games aren't going to be like what you see on YouTube.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a potentially damaging thing. I think it's great that there's all sorts of content that people can watch out there. Like there's the Matt Mercer Critical Role thing. Yep. But there's also a negative effect in that it skews people's like expectations for what D&D is, and they're like gonna expect like this amazing, and then they hold themselves up to a standard that might not be achievable, especially as college students or people with jobs might not be able to achieve that.
Yeah, when you watch the YouTube playthroughs of D&D, you have to remember, not all of them, but a lot of them, YouTube is their job. Yeah. They're doing this professionally. Maybe it's not just D&D, maybe they have other games and other content. But if you're talking about something like Critical Role, I can guarantee you that Matt Mercer is spending 8+ hours on organizing one of those sessions for the 4-ish hours that they're streaming.
Yeah.
That's not always realistic in the real world with someone, like you said, taking college classes, having a job, and all that other stuff. They might not be able to take 8 hours to help set up your game for 4 hours of play each week. Yeah. So it's going to be a very different level for what the streamers do versus what you might experience at your own table.
Yeah, and so the other thing, right, a big thing that we should touch on is the idea of preparation. So there's two roles in Dungeons and Dragons, or two distinctions. Is one, you could be a player, or two, you could be a dungeon master. And so the dungeon master is kind of, if you think of playing a video game, if you're playing a video game, the dungeon master is kind of taking the role of all the monsters and all the things that you experience in the game, and you are the player that is interacting with it. And so it's on the dungeon master to prepare the story, or prepare the quest, or things like that. And there's two main ways to go about that. One is you can actually buy a module. Do you have any module ones, or those are just the books?
I don't. I just have the core books with me.
Yeah, so you can buy pre-made adventures, and it kind of tells you how to lead players through and what options and town maps and things like that. Or there's the other take, which is homebrew, and that's kind of the take I like. And so homebrew is kind of making your own world, thinking about like why characters might want to go here, or how to entice them. So those are the two roles I just wanted to also clarify. And so my follow-up question is, what's your preferred role? Do you like to DM, or do you like to be a player?
I enjoy creating the worlds. I enjoy DMing. It is a very different experience than being a player. I also enjoy being a player. When it comes down to it, most of the time it's harder to find a DM than a player. So it's sometimes one of those cases of create your own fun.
Yeah.
So if it's a lot harder to find DMs, I'll be a DM, and then I just have to look for players if I want to start a game, which is usually a little easier to do.
Yeah. When you DM, how much time do you normally spend prepping, or what's your prep process look like? Because I think your process is very different.
It is very different than yours.
Yeah.
I tend to spend about half of the game time prepping before the game. Most of what I'm doing is marking in my monster manual. These are the monsters I want to use. This is how many they're going to be. This is going to be the layout of the dungeon. I don't have to get into all the teeny tiny nitty gritty details, but be able to reference anything I'm going to need for that next session right off the bat, and make sure I have NPC characters all set up with a little bit of, okay, it's this person, this is what they want, this is what they're going to do, this is their name. I find coming up with names for NPCs on the spot sometimes is challenging, especially when you're on like name 4 or 5 on the session you weren't expecting. And all of a sudden your fantasy world has a bunch of like Bob and Dave and stuff like that in it.
Yeah. I play with, I play in another group. So just for the listener, I play with 2 groups. One of them includes Mike, and I'm DMing that one. And then the other one I'm a player in. And the one that I'm a player in, we're playing this big homebrew campaign where we literally acted as deities, and then we had this rule set. I think it's called Dawn of Worlds, was this rule set that was like published on the internet, and we'd actually go through and iteratively like design the world together, which in order for that to work, I think you have to have players that are very story oriented. But then it's cool because we documented it in a Google Doc, and I think it turned out to be like a 150-page Google Doc, and we'd like find like reference images and all that stuff. And then Jason, who's being our dungeon master for that, uses that document as a reference for how like the world's supposed to work. Anyways, all that to say, we're very story oriented in that game, and we're actually using Savage Worlds as the rule system for that. But one of the things that Jason will always do is it's almost a meme that players will be like, well, what's this random guy's name? like you're saying.
Yeah.
And so Jason's technique is he'll throw it right back on you and be like, all right, everyone roll a d20. And like the person who rolls the lowest now has to like pick a name. And so that could be destructive because, someone could be like, well, his name's Poop. But luckily, like all of our players have that like somewhat buy-in where they're going to like pick something that makes sense. So that's always fun, but it's something that...
If you have the right players, you can definitely do that.
Yeah.
But I have played with people that would be very problematic to do with.
Yeah.
Either they feel like they're being put on the spot and get really uncomfortable, kind of panic, or like you said, they kind of derail things by throwing something so far out of field that everyone breaks their character, breaks the game for a little bit while they enjoy a laugh, and then you have to get things going again.
Yeah, I think like you have to have like a certain level of dynamics to be a dungeon master in terms of like, it's like a feedback loop, like paying attention to like when your players are having fun and then kind of taking mental notes, like, well, you have to consider your own fun too, but like trying to find that like, oh, they are finding this funny, or they really like when there's goofy NPCs or things like that. Yeah, it's kind of being a dungeon master definitely a little bit more on your toes, you know. But
yeah,
I think that's the other thing to like point out to new players or people that are starting out is, and it is really hard because sometimes you might find that like the group of kids that you're playing with, they're probably, you know, likely your friends. You can find that you don't have similar play styles, and I think some people in that case might just give up on D&D. But kind of what I recommend is reflecting and seeing like, was it just a difference of play styles, and maybe you might want to find friends that have a more compatible play style. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and one thing, especially when you get into more experienced D&D players and DMs, one thing that is usually done is what's called session zero. So before you even start the story, everyone gathers together, they sit down, they express their expectations of what that game is going to play out like. If you go, I want to make a suboptimal character and focus on the story, and the next person says, you know, I want to min-max everything to the extreme and focus on fighting, that can kind of be a red flag. Maybe this group of players isn't right for one game. Yeah. It might be something you want to spread out over 2 different games or a different system.
Yeah. I love suboptimal characters. It's like one of my
They can be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So suboptimal character is someone who is kind of the opposite of min-max, meaning like they have definite flaws. I remember, so the Dungeons and Dragons character that I am most fond of that I played was a halfling named Andrew Thorngage. He was a bard, and his thing is he had like this huge family. You know, I actually drew his family tree at one point to give to my DM, and there were like 200 things, and I kind of like envisioned like all these like stories about like some of the other characters that he's related to. Anyways, and so he cared a lot about his family, and so he was really, really, really scared of dying. And somehow he ended up with this group, and he wants to be with these group because he cares about them, but also he gets terrified in combat. And so what that resulted in is like sometimes I think like he would like want to get out of the combat situation, and like anytime anything started to going south, he would want to bounce. And so that's like that's more of a role play thing, but also he did have a bunch of spells like the big fart cloud and stuff like that, which can be useful. But anyways, and I think I think some players that were a little bit more mechanically focused were a little upset because as the player, right, I would constantly be like putting them at a disadvantage. But I personally like playing a character, however I think they actually should be played, Definitely.
I've done some suboptimal characters, but when I think of it, I think of bad stats.
Yeah.
I very much enjoy the old school rolling method. So in D&D, you have 6 ability scores. They go from 1 to 20, and there's normally a point buy or a couple different ways to generate scores. I like one of the cruelest methods. You roll 3d6, you add them up. That's your score, and you just put them in order. So you first roll your strength. Whatever you get there, that's your strength. You have no say over that kind of thing. I very much enjoy that for one-shots where you're not running a whole campaign, but you might be, one session, maybe 2, because then you don't have to go, oh, this character just isn't ever going to work, and stick with it the whole time. But you can have a lot of fun coming up with creative solutions that you might not be pushed to think about if you have oh, yep,
Yeah.
all my stats are perfect.
Yeah, so it's like, I'm a warrior, I'm really good at fighting things, so I'm going to fight this. But then it makes for interesting stories if you are a warrior that doesn't have good skills at being a warrior, right? And so it's like,
Yeah.
I'm a warrior, but also I kind of got to consider this. It totally makes you think more as a player. And honestly, I think that makes for more interesting story. Not to say that it's not okay to have a mix of like some characters min-max and things like that.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I think if you had too many like goofy builds, you might run into some mechanical trouble potentially.
You definitely will, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I played a character one time, wizard, intelligence of 8, but I convinced the DM to give me this like crown of intellect, which put my intelligence at 19, and I played half the campaign like that. And then the rest of the party found out, and they started taking it off.
And all of a sudden you got a little.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's my weakness. Now I can't really do anything. If the party doesn't like what I'm doing, they take it off. I can't cast any more spells, and I'm done.
That's awesome.
So it was a lot of fun until they found out.
Yeah. What's your favorite magical item?
Favorite magical item? I guess it would be the immovable rod.
That's my favorite too. I love that.
There was, I'm forgetting the name of it. In 3.5, there was a shield that basically, if you charged with it, nothing could stop you until you wanted to. And just those two mechanics of this will keep moving, this won't move. Not necessarily together, because that usually destroys the universe. Leads to some really interesting situations. It's one of those items where it's more about creativity in the use than I get a bonus to this.
Yeah. So magic items are items that the dungeon master will like sprinkle through, or you might earn after fighting something big, or you might just find. And what they do is they, like Mike was saying, you can boost a stat, but also sometimes they have like mechanical things, or I should more like, I don't want to say mechanical things, but like they have features that you can use to help solve problems, or sometimes they don't solve any problems at all. Like another really common one is a bag of holding. So it's like a really small bag, but you can put a bunch of stuff in. But the immovable rod, right? So it's a rod, and you click a button, and then it just stays fixed in space and can withstand any force, and it just stays there. I know. In one of the campaigns that we played, I think the second campaign I ever played in, we had an immovable rod, and we had a boat that was going into a cyclone, and someone had the idea to like put the immovable rod, and the immovable rod is only like 1 foot, like in like a 1-inch diameter or something along those lines. Anyways, he put it in front of the boat to stop it from going down, and the boat was still going down, and it hit that rod, and the rod basically just tore through it like a bullet.
Yep.
And so we literally had this whole session about like, it was not going to be as bad, but now there was this huge gaping hole in our boat, and all this water was coming in, and I think we ended up using like a wish scroll that we had to reverse time and make it, because so many people died, which was awesome.
Well, I mean, that's what D&D is about, is having things happen at your table, whether it's something epic or something that's gone terribly, terribly wrong. Yeah. You went from being a boat going down a whirlpool to being a boat that has a giant gash in it going down a whirlpool. Yeah. And then you remember it for years, and it's an enjoyable memory.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, any item that can be used creatively instead of mechanically, those are the magic items I tend to enjoy.
Yeah.
So,
speaking of items, one of the other things that I'm super, super impressed with that you do is, so there's 2 ways of playing. One, you can play in person, or 2, you can play using like a tool like Roll20 is what we play with. But when you play in person, you typically will have some sort of miniatures or tokens or maps just to kind of keep track of things. And you go all in on your minis and maps. So
yeah,
why do you talk about that?
So about 2 years ago now, I started doing some mini painting. I find it as very enjoyable and relaxing, and with the group of players I was playing with at that time, they don't all have they don't necessarily have the mental stamina to play to play a theater of the mind style game.
Yeah.
So that's where you don't have these miniatures. You just have to constantly remember what the DM has said is, oh, I'm 50 feet away from them. My spell has a range of 60 feet. I can use it. Or I'm 50 feet away from them. I can only throw my dagger 20 feet. I have to get closer. And that at that point was slowing down my game. So I started trying miniatures and tokens. I started with just printing things out from the computer, kind of putting them in binder clips and having things to move around on a mat to help with reference point. But then I started buying some miniatures, and let's see here. I've got a couple here, and we've got a little ogre guy. And I started painting them and putting terrain on them, and I find it very relaxing. We've got a little pirate lord here.
Pirate dwarf lord.
I mean, tall for a dwarf.
Is he? Oh, he looks a little short. Maybe it's just a beard that makes me think he's.
Oh, yeah, he does have a nice big beard. So I guess I found taking the time to paint these miniatures that I'm going to use in my game, and I get to use, and I get to have something physical to play with, is really relaxing. Just the process of painting them.
Does it inform the story building at all for you ever? Like when you're painting them, do you ever think this ogre probably smells bad. He smells so bad that he probably, you know what I'm saying? Like any thoughts like that?
I think it's more the other way. I tend to purchase miniatures based on what I want to.
Stuff.
Yeah. So if I know, all right, the players are going to be fighting an ogre in 2 weeks, I'll buy an ogre miniature, paint it up, and hopefully have it ready for the table when they get there.
Gotcha.
There is a lot of, just ignore that's a goblin, that's actually a town guard. Yeah. I don't have infinite minis, and they kind of get expensive over time.
Yeah.
So.
So one of the things I do is, so we play on Roll20, which is online. That's because even though Mike's nearby, the rest of my players aren't nearby, right? They're in Lower Michigan, and so we play on Roll20. And so what that means is I have to prepare digital assets, and sometimes it is mostly theater of the mind. We'll still have a grid, and I'll draw stuff kind of with paint. But other times when I'm feeling a little bit more ambitious or have some more time is I'll go online and search for existing maps, like map files. And I do find that when I'm looking at maps, that kind of informs the story a little bit. I'll find a map, and then I got to say, how can the story fit into this map? Or what could these statues mean? Or what could they do? And I always like that because it's almost like I'm discovering the story as well, just by pushing things around.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the opposite side. I've made terrain tiles. They're modular. You can pull one of them from over there.
Yeah, so
I just put things together as the story needs it. Instead of having a digital map that's, fixed in one thing, I just have a bunch of these tiles. I put them next to each other. I can make whatever dungeon or configuration I want. And so I need the story to inform my map, which is kind of the opposite way of what you're doing with online.
Yeah.
I don't have the skills to make online maps like what you can find out there, so I have the skills to make squares with lines on them.
Yeah, the work that you do maybe I just might edit this and put something over it. Maybe you can see in the background, not super well, but that's just me. Anyways, but yeah, so a lot of the stuff you do is just out of foam, and you do kit bashing and things like that too, right?
Yeah. So actually, all the terrain I think I brought today is made out of foam.
Yeah, and so sorry for the listeners, but I do have to show this because it's so cool.
So it's a little brick wall. I cut out individual bricks of foam, glued them together in a little segment, and painted it.
Yeah,
It definitely takes time, and it's one of those things, like the mini painting, I find it relaxing. I'm in using my brain all day as a grad student, and then I can go home, and the prospect of making, 500 bricks isn't so bad because I get it set up and I just go through the motions and can kind of recuperate from thinking all day.
Yeah. Do you ever, like, how common, I talked about this in some of the other episodes before, but like, I honestly think that there's probably about a 30% of students at Tech have at least played D&D, from what I've found, or at least my students. Do you often find that, or that you're able to talk with someone else at Tech, and then all of a sudden you can talk about D&D? Or do you ever find that? I'm just curious.
So I play D&D with other people at Tech. So I know some people that play it, and they tend to be my friends, and I know their experiences. As far as random strangers, occasionally. It's not something that usually comes up in idle conversation, I guess. And people's opinion of what D&D is, as we kind of talked about earlier, there's such a wide spectrum of play styles. Their experience might be very different from what I think of when I think of D&D or a tabletop RPG.
I mean, D&D's kind of gotten like pretty big, with like last 7-ish years or something along those lines, right? It's really kind of gotten big. I think a lot of it had to do with how big Stranger Things was, and Stranger Things had the D&D in there, and people really thinking about the 80s, because D&D was really big in the 80s, I think, and maybe it's just because we're at Michigan Tech, but I kind of think there's not. I feel like there used to be like a nerdy negative connotation with like D&D, and I feel like that's kind of been.
I don't think that's the case anymore. It was definitely like in high school and stuff, playing D&D was the nerdy thing to do.
Yeah.
Now it seems most people are willing to accept people playing D&D as just being the same as if you went and played Monopoly or some other
or a video game or something like that.
Yeah, they kind of just see it all kind of lumped together in the same sort of category. So I don't think there's that negative, it's nerdy and that's bad connotation around anymore like it used to be. But I also think 5th edition was one of the things that kind of brought D&D back into the light. 4th edition was not liked by most people. They got very mechanical to the point where, a battle might take 4 or 8 hours just because you have to do so much math.
Yeah.
You don't get more turns, it's just they all take so much longer for the math.
Yeah.
That drove a lot of people away, and then 5th edition, they made it much more flexible with the rules, which was more inviting to new players. There's not as much to learn, so it's easier to kind of figure out how to get started in the game.
Yeah. Have you ever felt like genuine strong emotions during D&D before? Like, oh, I'm actually really sad about this, or like I'm actually a little terrified, or like.
I mean, I wouldn't say strong emotions, but yeah, it brings out a lot of emotions as you're telling a story, especially if you've been playing a character or playing with a group of people for a few years and something happens that this is the turning point for that character. This is going to change the rest of our story. That can really build up a lot of emotions, especially if you had something in your mind of, okay, well, this story is playing out nicely, it's happy, things are going well, and you go, oh, wait, no, the Lich actually killed, this whole town, and that's where we were supposed to go save someone, and what are we doing? Or the realization that maybe the party has become the bad guys.
Yeah.
Which happens more often than you think.
Yeah. I think, it does happen a lot, because, like, it's, what's the common term is, like, murder hobos, right? So, murder hobos are players that don't really live in a town, they go from town to town, and anytime there's a problem, they're like, oh, let's just kill this guy. And then...
Well, I think that's one of the flaws in the D&D system. They give you lots of rules on how combat works and how to fight battles and how to deal damage, and then all the other rules are much vaguer. Yeah. It's like, if you want to do something, you'll have to roll a check and check with your DM.
Yeah.
So there's very well-defined things for combat. Players know exactly what they are or aren't allowed to do. assuming they know the rules. But if they're going, oh, well, I want to save them in this creative way, they don't know what their obstacle is going to be. The obstacle becomes the DM, and until they figured out how their DM reacts to certain things, they might be more hesitant to take that route.
But I guess I never really thought about that. That's a super good point, that like you're more likely to think in terms of combat because you at least the system is predictable.
Right.
Whereas if you're like, oh, you know what, I actually think I'm going to try and coerce this guy or something, all of a sudden it's a lot more less predictable, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, that's fine, but the game's then gonna change depending on your DM. And maybe you think, you know, I'm a bard with high charisma, high persuasion, I should be able to persuade anyone. But then nothing's a challenge anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard as a DM to figure out where that line should be and where it should be for the current group you're playing with.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is another big thing that I think I neglected to say with DMing is you have to make sure things are balanced, right? Because it's you never want a DM that's like has some sort of power fantasy thing where they want to be like the strongest thing. Because the thing is, I could put like a billion dinosaurs and they just like kill you right away. But that's okay, maybe that's fun for the DM, maybe, but it's probably not gonna be fun for the players.
Yeah.
And so you have to like identify this line of where it's challenging, but not like overly challenging. Yeah. How do you identify that point?
How many times I kill my players?
Yeah.
What, I've died 6 times in your campaign now? Something like that?
I don't know how many times. Yeah, your character's weird though.
No, it's... I always try to figure out that at every 6-ish game sessions, if someone goes down at least once, that means the challenge is not dead, but in D&D, when you hit 0 hit points, you fall unconscious, and then you have to make a couple extra saving throws. You might end up dying, but if anyone heals you up during that time, you get back on your feet and you're back in the fight. I'm not trying to kill the players, but I want it to be tough enough that there's the occasional someone falling unconscious, falling on the ground.
That they might die.
And they go, oh yeah, this is still a dangerous situation. We haven't gotten so strong, we can just do whatever we want. And finding that balance is really hard because...
Well, yeah, I do have another philosophy with that though. Oftentimes I'll try and balance things to some degree, but there's other times that maybe you've noticed this or maybe you haven't, where I don't actually think about the balance at all, and I just think like, how strong would this character be? And then it kind of actually shifts the responsibility, where like the player, because players are always going to assume that the dungeon master is probably going to set something reasonable. I shouldn't say always going to assume, but and so that makes like, oh, this is a combat encounter we can take. This is a combat encounter, and so like you have once in a while. I like the idea of, oh, we can take this combat thing, and all of a sudden, like, oh no, we can't because oh wait, this thing is like this all-powerful lich, or this thing is like a demigod or something along those lines. No, we can't take it. Mm-hmm. But I suppose that's also kind of on like the cueing from the DM to indicate that they're really powerful by like smushing something's head before the players get there or something along those lines, which...
Yeah, that can be really hard. And again, I've said this a lot. I'm going to keep saying it. It depends on the group you're playing with.
Yeah.
With one of my recent groups, one of the challenges I had was not letting the players take a long rest before every combat.
Yeah.
They kept finding some way, and like, oh, we've had a combat in the ruins. We're going to go all the way back to town to the inn, take a long rest, and then come back. And that can be really hard to deal with. Yeah. There are different ways to deal with it. A lot of them tend to slow down the progression of the campaign because a lot of the times they say, well, the monsters are going to repopulate the dungeon or set up new traps or something like that. But then that's slowing down how long, or increasing the time it takes for everyone to get through the dungeon. So
how did you deal with it?
Suddenly lots of dungeon doors started collapsing when she went through them.
They were in Moria.
Yeah, so they went in, and now they know they have to find their way out as part of the quest. And then also putting timelines on things. If I say, okay, this quest needs to be done within a week, and the location is 2 days travel away, that means they really only have 3 days to do the quest. And then they have to figure out how are they budgeting that smaller section of time. But as characters level up, they get more and more options to avoid that.
Yeah. I know. I know. In a campaign that we played with Jason before, I think we had that tendency. And one of the things that he did was, so there's two types of rests. There's short rests and there's long rests, at least in the D&D system. In a short rest, you have a certain amount of dice you can roll to get some hit points back to kind of heal up. And then there's a long rest where you get everything back. And what he did was he made long rest short rests. And then like the long rest you could do like every week or if you actually like took a really long rest. And so that made it a little more balanced, I suppose. So you couldn't do that back and forth thing because then the timeline would kind of come into play.
And it's going to completely depend on who you're playing with.
Yeah.
Some campaigns, you'll have to convince them to start taking rests.
Yeah.
Because they just go, nope, we want to get as much done as possible in this one day. I don't know how you fought, 15 battles in a day, but somehow you did it because time in D&D can get a little funky.
Yeah.
And now you're going, oh, wait, but the boss is next, and they were supposed to take 3 days to get through this dungeon. This isn't going to go well.
Yeah.
How do we stop this group and say, hey, you should take a minute, take your rest, heal back up before you go in. And that's half of what being a DM is about, is kind of the social aspect of reading your group, figuring out what they need as a group, what they need as players, and making sure it's clear they have options. Yeah. If you want players to run away from a battle, you can't do what I was doing where the entrance to the dungeon has collapsed.
Yeah.
I've taken away their option to run away.
Yeah.
So then, yes, I have to make sure everything's balanced. If you're out in a field and people can just run off, sure, that can be a cue that fleeing a combat is acceptable.
I forgot to ask a philosophical question.
All right.
What does Dungeons and Dragons mean to you? Like,
what does it mean to me?
Yeah, like what meaning does it have to you? What does it do for you? Why D&D? Why not just like a book club or something else?
For D&D, I guess the big two things that D&D does for me is it is very much a social game, a cooperative social game. I enjoy playing board games. A lot of those end up being competitive, or you end up getting what's called quarterbacking in the game, where one person who really knows the board game just tells every player what to do if it's cooperative. D&D, there's enough going on, there's enough different aspects to a character, and I don't think it's necessarily right for someone to say, your character would do this because that's the optimal move. You don't know what their character would do, you might suspect, but the character has to make those decisions for themselves. So it's a nice cooperative game that you can all play, you can talk about, and you get these memorable moments out of it. Board games, I might remember something weird that happens for a couple weeks or maybe even a year, but D&D, I remember stories from when I was playing in middle school, and that's something that sticks with you because the stories are all a little more personal. You become a little bit more invested in this set of characters that went out to play. And
yeah, I know, like, I always kind of think of it as when I was a kid, me and my brother and Billy, who's another one of our players, we grew up in the same little area, and we were really young. You would play these like imaginary games where you would, go out into the woods, and all of a sudden the wood was being attacked by X, Y, or Z, and you'd pretend to be these things and come up with these stories and talk to people that weren't really there. And I feel like Dungeons and Dragons is just that same thing, except for more appropriate for
Adults.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So you don't look like you're crazy.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad that an adult might look like they're crazy if they just wanted to go play in their woods and pretend. I'm really looking forward to my daughter getting to that point so I can go back to that a little bit. I do play D&D with my daughter once in a while. And I find, like, it's actually... she was only 2 years old. Did I tell you about this when I played D&D with her? So she was 2 years old, and I had, like, this... She had this quest to, like... God, I can't remember... that there was an owl that was plaguing a village, and so we had the little minis out on the map, and she picked this little gnome mini, and I pretended like, oh Hazel, can you please help? There's a giant owl, and we don't know where it's at and all that, and so she came up with the idea like, oh, we need a mouse, and so I had to do a roll to catch a mouse, and she caught a mouse, and then the owl shows up. And she was like, I think I need to hug the owl to get rid of it. And I mean, I could have been a hard ass DM and like, nope, it's gonna fight you. But like,
the owl's actually a demon in disguise.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, it was something along those lines. And the owl was so moved by that. But like, yeah, that was a cool moment. Kind of like we were saying, like those stories, like I've played a bunch of board games with Hazel before, and I don't remember that, but I do remember even those little moments. So yeah, that's totally right.
D&D definitely can be played with younger kids. Yeah. Because D&D is at its core storytelling.
Yeah.
So as long as the kid is old enough to say, this is what I want my character to do, they can roll the dice. You can do all the math for them. Yeah. It's not a whole lot of math, but you can tell a story together. And
yeah, even like at Hazel's age, I wasn't even really worried about the math. It was like, it could have been a coin flip realistically, like, oh, it does happen or doesn't happen. And so I would see, it was like, oh, it's a 17, it definitely happens. It's a 10, oh, it might not happen, just because she wanted to roll the dice so bad. But
yeah, rolling dice is always fun.
Yeah. So here's a question.
Okay.
Are you ready? Thinking of the Dungeons and Dragons universe, the Wizards of the Coast stuff, which type of being would you like to meet the most? One exists and you get to meet it.
Which being from a
like the Monster
universe.
Manual or something along those lines. What would you like to meet the most?
Most of the creatures in D&D tend to want to kill you.
Yeah.
Which does limit my choice a little bit.
It could be in a cage if you want to be.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's not going to kill me right off the bat.
Yeah.
I guess the oozes have always been really interesting to me.
Yeah.
I know this is weird. It's such an alien type creature, something that is like, there's no organs, there's nothing inside, it's just this consistent material, and how does that work?
Yeah, it's almost like a jellyfish. Like how does a jellyfish work?
Yeah, so something like that, yes, it's gonna, if you touch it, melt you or whatever, burn you, or but it's just seeing a creature like that, how does it actually move? How does it... I feel like that would be really interesting to learn, especially if it's in a cage and I'm a few hundred feet away.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
Yeah, like the gelatinous cube is also a really funny, like...
It is a hilarious
entity.
monster.
So it's basically just a giant jello cube that can like obstruct and like slowly move toward you, and if you get absorbed by it, you
and it's somehow perfectly transparent if it wants to be. It moves around dungeons, and it's one of the excuses why you don't see all the corpses in dungeons where people keep going.
Because the gelatinous cubes are cleaning it up.
It cleans up everything that's left behind, and it digests it all into its gelatinous form. It's a little weird, but it's just one of those things. It's so alien. It would be
cool to see.
Interesting, yeah.
I think my choice for thing that I would like to meet the most, I mean, a dragon would be dope, but like, I think that's too cliche. I think what I would want to see the most is a manticore. So a manticore. It's like it's the human head, right? It's like the human head with like the shark teeth on like a tiger's body or something along those lines, isn't it? Or the three heads. I can't remember.
The chimera has three heads.
Chimera, yeah.
Manticore has the human face with like a lion's mane. I'm not sure what the body is. It usually has giant claws and like a scorpion tail with like 30 stingers off the end.
Yeah, it's this weird kind of scary looking thing, and I just would like to see something that terrifying, like not have to like interface.
You would
with
enjoy it to be terrified. That's what I heard.
I think so. Like, yeah, to never have to see it again. Yeah. Yeah. So, I want to change the topic just a little bit. So talked a lot about Dungeons and Dragons. Talked a lot about crafting your own things and stuff like that. Another hobby you have is woodworking.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Like, what kinds of things do you woodwork?
It depends. I don't have a woodworking spot of my own. I've been borrowing Shane's garage when weather's appropriate. I've made a gaming table for D&D, and then I promptly moved houses.
Is that done?
It is.
It's done. Oh, I need to come see it now that it's.
But the problem is, I moved houses, and now I have nowhere to put it.
Oh no!
So it's in storage. But it's done, and since then I've been working on much smaller projects. I've got this is a little dice tower that I made for D&D out of bloodwood.
Bloodwood, that's so dope.
It's nice red, brown hues. So I've started doing some smaller stuff like that. Recently I've started doing something called kumiko.
Okay.
It's a kind of a Japanese style of woodworking where you're making these gridded patterns, and then you usually put like rice paper or something like that behind it. I'm just trying out the patterns. It's all hand tools, so like I said, I don't have a large space to work, so I've got a teeny tiny workbench in my basement that's like 18 inches by 2 feet. Yeah. And I can do that there, and I'm starting to figure out how to do that, and yeah.
Huh. So, hold up. I want to flick this because I want to hear this. It's actually, I think I remember you talking about this. You didn't want this to be too loud. Like I'm flicking the dice box for those of you that can't see.
It is super loud. We've got dice here. Is it still
super loud? Okay,
yes.
So.
I wasn't able to get that one any quieter.
So.
It's going to shoot the dice at you.
Oh. Yeah, it's really
very loud.
It is very loud. And that is a 2, by the way, that I rolled. So there we go.
that sounds about right for the mess on the floor.
Oh wait, the D20 was a 19 though.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you learn woodworking? Like how do you get good at it? Like how?
You build. How do you learn anything? You do it.
Yeah.
Honestly, you have to have a project you're interested in doing, and you try to make the project. Don't be like me. Don't start with a giant table. Yeah. Start with something smaller, like a dice tower or something like that you can more easily manage, because a lot less cost of materials of that versus a table. So if I mess something up, I can just start over and not worry about all my material being lost or damaged or miscut. Yeah. And talk to people that know something about woodworking tools, whether it's just construction stuff, which you can get away with construction tools for fine woodworking if you're careful and you make sure everything's been aligned properly and set up properly. But then there's fine woodworking tools that have a little bit more staying power in some of those alignments, so you don't have to check and correct them quite as often. But yeah, you just have to start making something, decide on what you want to make, and make it. It's gonna be off or wrong the first time. Yeah. You might make 4 or 5 of them, and then I'll finally go, this is what I'm happy with.
Yeah, that's kind of maybe what I was gonna lead you toward, or want to talk about is I think the reason there's lots of people that want to woodwork, or do any sort of craft for that matter, that are apprehensive because they're gonna screw it up, or what they're gonna do isn't gonna be as cool as what someone else did. I think you hit the nail on the head about plan to make a couple, or you know, and it's really hard for college students because you don't have a big budget. I know that was always my challenge. Is I was apprehensive to do stuff because I couldn't afford to buy wood to make multiples, and I think honestly I would kind of want to have a podcast episode just about making stuff. So that might be in the future.
That might be another podcast.
But oh shoot, I was gonna say something with regard to this. I just completely forgot it. So I'm gonna change the topic. You're a grad student.
I am.
Wait, let's not scare people, but like, what's your research?
Right now, I'm working on the generation of entangled photons with nonlinear electro-optic polymers. So I'm trying to create entangled photons in a new way.
So entangled photons, remind me what that is.
It's two photons that have a quantum relationship, and you can use them for things such as quantum computing or quantum communications, which allows for some new and evolving encoding techniques so you can make sure data is protected as it's transmitted. I don't know much about how they actually do that encoding, but I know they need entangled photons to do it.
Gotcha.
And I'm looking at a new method that might be applicable.
Do you get more stressed out thinking about that or woodworking? Or do you just not get stressed about stuff like that?
Woodworking can sometimes be stressful when you're like, all right, this is the last piece I need to cut. I need to cut it the exact right size or nothing will fit. And it might be stressful for a few moments. And then it's fine with research and a degree that takes multiple years. It's kind of always a little bit of stress in the back of your head. Yeah. What do I have to do next? How do I keep this going forward?
Yeah.
So I don't find woodworking stressful. It's same reason why I paint minis and everything else. 95% of woodworking is relaxing. Yeah. Sure. So, yeah, I don't think woodworking is all that stressful.
Gotcha.
Just those few moments when you go, there's no going back.
Yeah. I have one final question. I can't remember. Have you listened to an episode before? You're not going to offend me if you have never listened to an episode before.
I have not listened to a full episode before.
Oh, okay. So, wait. So now it's feedback time. Is there a reason why you didn't listen to a full episode? Did it go too long or was it boring? You're not going to offend me.
No. So I started listening to a couple of them kind of in the, like, I have 10 or 15 minutes before I have to go to my next meeting. I don't quite have enough time to get into something.
Gotcha.
And I had a little gap I needed to fill. Gotcha. And then I went to my meeting and I was busy and
came back to it. Okay. Yeah. That's good feedback though. Okay. Well, so then you know what the last question is, and I forgot to warn you.
I have not seen a full episode. I started at the beginning of the episode.
So anyways, the last question always is, what album do you recommend someone listens to? And I know you don't listen to a lot of music, so this might be hard for you. But what's an album you think someone should give a listen to? Or song, or general artist.
So I would say the score from Wicked. It's a musical.
Yeah.
It is. I prefer musicals to regular music.
Yeah.
Music is great for background, but I usually don't pay enough attention to it.
Yeah.
Musicals have the story, and like D&D, I enjoy stories.
Yeah.
I very much enjoy the Wicked soundtrack, so
gotcha.
That might be my choice.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I think that's it for us today. So keep it real.
Awesome.